There exists a silent contract in the shadowed realms of the human psyche, an unspoken accord between the giver and the taker, the mirror and the face that stares into it. This is the pact between the empath and the narcissist, a dance of light and shadow, where one soul pours itself out to fill the emptiness of another. But what happens when the music stops? What becomes of the shadow when the light that gave it form turns away? This is the story of a collapse, not of a person, but of a meticulously crafted illusion. It is the dark truth of who the narcissist becomes when the empath, their primary source of life, stops playing along.
The severance is not a thunderous cataclysm, but a quiet click. It is the sound of a lock turning, a door softly closing in a house that was thought to have no exits. For the narcissist, this moment of the empath's withdrawal is an existential terror, a sudden and violent plunge into a vacuum. The air, once rich with the oxygen of adoration, validation, and emotional servitude, what psychologists call narcissistic supply, is suddenly thin, unbreathable. The grand stage upon which they perform their life's magnum opus is plunged into darkness, the audience of one having silently slipped out of the theater. This is not merely a breakup. It is a deconstruction. The empath was never just a partner or a friend. They were a function, a utility. They were the mirror that reflected a perfected image, an image the narcissist manufactured to escape the gnawing void within. As the psychoanalyst Carl Jung might argue, the empath was the carrier of the narcissist's disowned self, their humanity, their vulnerability, their capacity for genuine connection. The empath held these rejected parts so the narcissist wouldn't have to. And so, when the empath reclaims their projection and walks away, the narcissist is left alone with the one thing they have spent a lifetime fleeing: their own unadorned, undeveloped true self. The initial reaction is not sadness, but disbelief, then a frantic, scrambling rage. It is the fury of a king whose subjects have suddenly forgotten how to kneel, the panic of a puppeteer whose marionette has just cut its own strings. The silence that follows the empath's departure is deafening, filled with the static of an identity in freefall. The control they so desperately crave evaporates like mist, revealing the barren machinery of their psyche. The illusion of their omnipotence, an illusion the empath's compliance so faithfully upheld, shatters into 1,000 pieces. In that deafening silence, the narcissist begins to hear the faint, horrifying whispers of their own emptiness. The face the narcissist shows the world is a masterpiece of artifice. It is what Carl Jung termed the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate the world, to make a specific impression on others, and, crucially, to conceal our true nature. For the narcissist, the persona is not just a tool. It is their entire perceived reality. It is a gleaming fortress built to impress and intimidate, with walls polished by charm and accolades. But this fortress is built on a foundation of sand, and the withdrawal of the empath is the tide that washes it all away. Without the empath's constant validation to reinforce its structure, the mask begins to crack. These are not mere fissures. They are deep, jagged fractures that reveal the terrifying emptiness beneath. The public image, the confident leader, the charming friend, the perfect partner, can no longer hold its form. The private chaos, a maelstrom of insecurity and shame, begins to seep through the cracks. The carefully modulated voice may tremble with uncharacteristic rage. The practiced, easy smile may tighten into a grimace of raw fury. Colleagues, friends, and family who have only ever known the polished exterior are now confronted with glimpses of the raw, unregulated chaos that the empath absorbed daily. This is the collision of two fundamental Jungian concepts: the persona and the shadow. The shadow, as Jung defined it, is the repository of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. It contains our repressed weaknesses, our darkest impulses, and our deepest fears. The narcissist's persona of superiority is built in direct opposition to their shadow, which holds the terrifying truth of their own inferiority and vulnerability. The empath acted as an unconscious buffer, a screen onto which the narcissist could project their shadow. With that screen removed, the shadow is no longer externalized. It begins to surge inward and upward, overwhelming the fragile ego and cracking the porcelain mask from within. The world, for the first time, sees the monster that the empath was tasked with taming. A machine deprived of its fuel source will grind to a halt. A predator deprived of its prey will begin to starve. For the narcissist, the loss of their primary empathic supply triggers a primal, desperate hunt. This is not a search for love or companionship, but a frantic, compulsive quest to find a replacement fuel source to power the false self. Their very sense of existence depends on it. The emptiness left by the empath is a wound that cannot be allowed to fester. It must be filled immediately and indiscriminately. The hunt is characterized by a chilling lack of discernment. Anyone who can offer a sliver of attention, admiration, or validation becomes a target. Old contacts are resurrected, social media becomes a hunting ground, and new acquaintances are love-bombed with a terrifying intensity. This is the idealization phase of the narcissistic cycle, accelerated to a manic pace. The narcissist becomes a chameleon, mirroring the desires and expectations of their new target with breathtaking speed and precision. They are the perfect partner, the most attentive friend, the most understanding soul, a role they play with the desperation of a drowning man gasping for air. This compulsive search is driven by a profound, almost infantile, fear of abandonment. The empath's departure was not just a rejection. It was an existential threat that reawakened the narcissist's deepest, most repressed wound, the terror of being unseen, of being nothing. This fear propels them into a labyrinth of their own making. They are driven through dark, winding corridors of their psyche, not in search of self-understanding, but in a predatory pursuit of a new host. The obsession is all-consuming. The world is no longer a place to be experienced, but a landscape to be scanned for potential resources. Every conversation is an audition, every person a potential mirror. The hunt is not just about feeling good again. It's about staving off the psychological death they feel closing in around them. When the hunt for new supply fails to immediately soothe the gaping wound of narcissistic injury, the narcissist's psyche resorts to its most primitive and powerful defense mechanism: projection. Carl Jung described projection as the unconscious act of attributing one's own unacknowledged qualities, usually negative ones, to another person. It is a way of disowning the shadow. For the narcissist in a state of collapse, this mechanism goes into overdrive. The world becomes a canvas upon which they paint a masterpiece of their own inner torment. Unable to confront the shame, inadequacy, and rage boiling within, they cast it outward. The empath who left is no longer seen as a person who reclaimed their autonomy, but is recast as the ultimate villain. They are labeled the real narcissist, unstable, manipulative, a perfect reflection of the very traits the narcissist cannot face in themselves. This is more than mere blame shifting. It is a desperate attempt to reshape reality itself, to create a narrative where the narcissist is the perpetual victim and the world is their abuser. Every perceived slight, every neutral interaction is filtered through this lens of projection. A colleague's constructive criticism is interpreted as a vicious attack. A friend's unavailability is seen as a profound betrayal. They are throwing shadows at invisible enemies, fighting phantoms born from their own unintegrated darkness. This externalization of their inner state provides a temporary, intoxicating relief. By making the world the source of their pain, they absolve themselves of any responsibility. They are not empty. The world is hollow. They are not failing. Others are conspiring against them. The shattered fragments of their own self-image are projected onto the world, and in that distorted reflection, they find a perverse and fleeting sense of validation. They are the tragic hero in a world of villains, a reality far more palatable than the dark truth of their own making. For a time, the narcissist's persona held the shadow at bay. The empath, by absorbing the narcissist's projections and providing a constant stream of validation, unknowingly helped keep the beast caged. Now, with the empath gone, the cage door swings open. The shadow, the dark, repressed side of the narcissist's personality, is no longer a whisper in the back of the mind. It emerges from the depths, a monstrous and undeniable presence. This is the self the narcissist has spent a lifetime denying. The terrified child, the envious rival, the inadequate failure, the unlovable soul. Jung taught that whatever we repress from our conscious life does not disappear. It festers in the unconscious, gaining strength in the darkness. For the narcissist, this shadow self is a terrifying amalgamation of all their disowned vulnerabilities. Its emergence is not a moment of potential integration, but a hostile takeover. The carefully curated image of strength and superiority dissolves, replaced by the raw, unfiltered contents of their unconscious. The behaviors that surface are often shocking to those who only knew the mask. The cool, collected intellectual may devolve into incoherent rages. The charismatic charmer may become a paranoid recluse. Destructive impulses that were once subtly channeled into manipulation now break free in their rawest form. We may see acts of petty vengeance, obsessive stalking, or campaigns of slander designed to destroy the empath who dared to abandon them. This is the shadow in its purest, most destructive form. It is the raw, primal fear and rage of an ego facing annihilation. The storm that was once contained within, a storm the empath was forced to weather daily, has now broken its banks and floods the narcissist's entire reality. They are consumed by the very darkness they refuse to acknowledge, a walking embodiment of their own personal hell. As the internal chaos intensifies, the narcissist's attempts to regain control become more desperate and their manipulative tactics more transparent. The artful subtlety they once employed is replaced by a crude and frantic puppetry. They are no longer a grand chess master moving pieces with strategic foresight. They are a panicked player, knocking over the entire board in a fit of pique. This is the stage where their profound dependency on the empath is laid bare. Gaslighting becomes more blatant. They will rewrite history with a desperate, almost pathetic conviction. "We were so happy," they'll insist, "until you became unstable." They will deny events that unequivocally happened, their voice laced with a frantic certainty designed to make the empath, and anyone else who will listen, question their own sanity. Triangulation, the tactic of pulling a third person into the dynamic, is deployed with reckless abandon. They will parade a new source of supply, not out of genuine affection, but as a cruel tool to provoke jealousy and prove their own desirability. They will confide in mutual friends, painting a heartbreaking picture of their own victimhood, engineering a narrative where the empath is the cruel and unjust aggressor. Guilt-tripping becomes their mother tongue. They will speak of their profound loneliness, their unbearable pain, their fear for the future, all carefully crafted to trigger the empath's core trait, their compassion. Each message, each phone call, each accidental encounter is a baited hook, a desperate attempt to ensnare the empath back into their role. These are not the actions of a powerful, self-assured individual. They are the frantic, flailing maneuvers of an addict in the throes of withdrawal. The tangled strings of their psychological games are now visible to all, revealing not a master manipulator, but a desperate, dependent creature, terrified of being left alone with the emptiness of their own soul. There comes a point when all the frantic hunting for supply, all the projection, and all the desperate manipulation fails. The new sources of validation prove shallow and fleeting. The attempts to reclaim the empath are met with a wall of silence and unbreachable boundaries. It is in this profound state of failure that the narcissist experiences what is known as narcissistic collapse. This is not a moment of quiet sadness. It is a full-scale psychological implosion. The grand, inflated ego, deprived of the external validation that keeps it afloat, deflates with catastrophic speed. The feeling is not one of humility, but of utter annihilation. This is the narcissistic injury from which there is no immediate recovery. The void they have been fleeing their entire life finally catches up and swallows them whole. An existential terror sets in, the horrifying realization of their own profound and inescapable loneliness. They are an actor on an empty stage, under a broken spotlight, with no lines to say and no audience to applaud. The silence is no longer just an absence of praise. It is a confirmation of their own nothingness. This collapse can manifest in two primary ways: an outward explosion or an inward implosion. Some may erupt in spectacular displays of rage, lashing out at anyone and everyone in a desperate attempt to assign blame for their agony. Others may withdraw completely, consumed by a deep, depressive state. They may become listless, unable to maintain the facade of daily functioning, retreating into a shell of apathy and despair. This is the ultimate confrontation with the self, a self they have deemed worthless and unlovable. It is the moment they are forced to feel, if only for a short time, the full weight of the emptiness that the empath's presence held at bay. It is a terrifying, barren landscape of the soul, a place devoid of mirrors, where they have no choice but to see the hollow truth of who they have become. In the depths of collapse, a flicker of opportunity exists, a chance for self-reflection, for change, for the arduous journey of healing. A psychologically healthy individual, faced with such a profound crisis, might be forced to turn inward, to confront the source of their pain. But the narcissistic personality structure is, by its very nature, a fortress against self-awareness. To truly self-reflect would be to accept the unbearable shame they have spent a lifetime avoiding. And so, almost invariably, they refuse the call to redemption. From a Jungian perspective, this is the ultimate refusal to face the shadow. The process of individuation, Jung's term for becoming a whole, integrated self, demands a conscious and courageous confrontation with the darkest parts of our psyche. It requires acknowledging our flaws, our vulnerabilities, and our capacity for evil. The narcissist, however, has built their entire identity on the denial of these very things. To them, the shadow is not a part of themselves to be integrated, but an alien entity to be vanquished or projected. Admitting fault is not an act of strength, but the ultimate defeat. We can see this refusal through the lens of psychological archetypes. The narcissist is trapped in the archetype of the pure eternus, the eternal child, who refuses to accept the responsibilities and limitations of adulthood. They cling to a fantasy of their own perfection and omnipotence, unwilling to undertake the difficult journey of growth. They stand before the ancient, weathered door to their own unconscious, a door that promises deeper understanding but also demands accountability, and they refuse to turn the knob. True transformation would require the death of the false self, a sacrifice they are unwilling to make. It is easier to remain a broken king on a desolate throne than to become a humble pilgrim on the long road to wholeness. When the possibility of luring the empath back is gone, and the refusal to self-reflect has slammed the door on healing, the narcissist's unresolved narcissistic injury curdles into something darker and more patient: rage. But this is not always the explosive, flailing anger of the initial collapse. It can be a cold, simmering, and vindictive obsession. Deprived of the supply that once regulated their fragile self-esteem, their psyche seeks a new organizing principle, and often, that principle is revenge. The empath, the person who was once the source of their very sense of self, is now transformed in their mind into the sole author of their misery. This singular focus provides a dark sense of purpose. The world, which felt chaotic and empty, is now simplified into a single target. The obsession becomes a new form of supply. Scheming, plotting, and fantasizing about the empath's downfall provides a perverse sense of power and control in a life that feels utterly out of control. This rage can manifest in many ways. It can be loud and overt, a campaign of slander, legal harassment, or attempts to turn friends and family against the empath. Or it can be silent and insidious. The narcissist becomes a shadowy observer, watching from a distance, waiting for a moment of vulnerability, a chance to inflict pain. They may derive satisfaction from seeing the empath struggle, believing it to be a just punishment for the crime of abandonment. This is the final, toxic stage of their attachment. The connection is no longer maintained by a desire for validation, but by a desire for destruction. The empath's freedom is a constant, burning reminder of the narcissist's own inner prison, and the rage that consumes them is merely the desperate, futile rattling of their own cage bars. In the end, The entire saga, the withdrawal, the collapse, the rage, is a grand and tragic irony. The empath's final act of departure becomes the one thing the narcissist could never provide for themselves. A perfect, unflinching mirror. But this mirror does not reflect the grandiose, perfected image the narcissist craves. It reflects only the void. The empath's absence is not an attack, but a revelation. It is the final, incontrovertible proof of the narcissist's own emptiness. The narcissist, in their frantic dance of manipulation and control, was never truly engaging with the empath as a person. They were engaging with a reflection of their own needs, a projection of their own disowned self. The empath's decision to stop playing along is not the cause of the narcissist's collapse, but merely the event that exposes a collapse that was always imminent, a psychological house of cards waiting for a single breath of truth to bring it down. The final, dark truth is this: the narcissist does not become someone new when the empath leaves. They become, finally and irrevocably, what they have always been beneath the mask, a hollow echo. The empath's journey to freedom, on the other hand, is a journey toward wholeness. By reclaiming their projections and establishing boundaries, they step out of the shadow and into their own light. They demonstrate that true power lies not in controlling others, but in the radical act of self-awareness and inner freedom. The narcissist is left with their desolate, empty throne, a monument to a kingdom that was never real. The empath walks away, not into a void, but into a world of their own making, finally free from the weight of carrying another soul.